Hello, hello to both of you, Jay and Weed. So, as I said, tonight's stream is going to be special because, as you've probably already noticed, and I'm just going to adjust the mic quickly, I finally did it. Oh, wait, now that. There we go. That's better. I finally reached affiliate. Hell yes! I'm super excited. And I am so happy to be able to have got here. did it! And I've basically been... Yeah, thank you! Right? I was really busy today, basically trying to get everything set up, and also, for those who, subscribe, or is it not gonna give me my... It's not even gonna give me my own emote. Okay. It's alright. It's all good. Let me get a new, chat box, you know, something that'll let me. I look more high res. Interesting. Did not think I would look more high res. Hold on. I need to show this. Boop. I also made that. Might be. I mean... Oh. Maybe my computer just likes me today. I'm like, okay, cool. So yeah. This will be the... I still need to work out the channel points, but I'll do that tomorrow. Oh, no worries. No worries. I didn't expect anything. I was just like, hell yes. Thank you. Oh god, I forgot I had that. I forgot that was my alert. I'm like, wait, did I change that? Thank you so much, Justin. Yes, yes, yes I do. Alright. So, tonight... Part of me is thinking is like, did the mods get access to the, emotes or not? Is it just me? Oh. Also, I feel like Justa's waiting for the tier 3 to, for me to drop the tier 3. Are we gonna start this being like, okay guys, give me a list of channel things you want to redeem? Yeah, no worries. Cause I feel like Justa's gonna have a bunch of cursed shit for me. And maybe Lep if he's here tonight. Alright. Shall we get into the reading, or are we gonna meme the hell out of what will become very... Well. Nah, that'll be Monday. Monday, I have a feeling, is when it'll be like... Alright, so where are our cursed channel points? Ooh. Bit sounds would be interesting. I didn't put the, I should put the wall here. Because then I can see it jump around. Remote wall. Boom. There we go. Yeah. Boom. I was like, I have to get the, I have to get the first channel, emote up here. Had to be that. Ooh, that's I have a big tome here, so me finding anything to read is gonna be, well, I wouldn't say it'd be hard to read, but you just need the view. Huh? You should let me know this ahead of time. I will doubly make sure. Saute. Yeah. I didn't know exactly what to name them, and I was just like, that makes sense. This fits me, I believe. The sub badges are also Luna. And at 3 months is I I made different Luna mascot chips, or well, I only have 2 so far. I have a normal and I have an 8-bit for 3 months. So yeah, I'll probably have to oh, there it is. Ah, okay. As long as you're having a good break. I I wouldn't exactly say you're the captain. You're a lot of things, but I would not put power to you. That's for sure. All right. Should we get started? You see, Arthur here still has more power. Goth doctors would have been fine. Why would I have goth doctors as my chips? I'm perfect because I'm anti-authority. I can't like that. You can be anti-authority all you want until Arthur and Jay swing the banhammer. Well, they're not changing, okay? You know what? How about I make that a chip goal? Where maybe I'll say one of her lines or something. You can get me to say one of them. Why am I not surprised to hear you say that? Like, it's like, yeah. Yeah, no, I could see that. Oh. Alright. I'm gonna actually try to do what I was planning for stream and not be... The Red Death has long devastated the... Now I can't take anything seriously because... Oh. Oh. What is the last thing, Justa? I'm just like, what is the last thing? Oh no. Actually, what's funny is, so as I was getting stuff ready for stream, I had another friend of mine's stream open, and they were talking about Pyramid Head. I'm like, yeah, actually, I wouldn't mind getting you, to do a sketch of me dressed in Pyramid Head. Thank you so much for the bit, sweet. Oh, thank you so much. Oh. I don't know what to say. I'm like, I never expected this. This is all new to me. Alright. The Red Death has long devastated the country. No pestilence has ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal. The redness of the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse. I forgot how bloody this is. And then profuse bleeding at the pores, with disillusion. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim. This was like the worst one to start on. I shouldn't be surprised. It is Edgar Allan Poe after all. Were the pest's ban which shut him out. Yeah, no worries. Actually, one thing I am going to mention is when I do start taking breaks, I am going to run ads just as kind of a good timer for me to know when to, or how long the break will be, because I always feel bad when I take a break if I either, I feel like I either leave too long or I take it way too short, so the ads are going to kind of help me, gauge that, if that makes sense. Just mostly for my thing, really. Good question. Who uses those nowadays? Were the pest banned which shut him out from aid, and from the sympathy of his fellow man, and the whole seizure progressed the termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. Oh. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hales of light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired in deep seclusions of one of his castled abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled in. This wall had gates of iron, the courtiers having entered through furnaces and massive hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned with such precautions of courtiers might bid defiance to cognition. The external word could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was a folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were the improvisateur, there were ballet dancers, and there were musicians. There was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was towards the close of the 5th or 6th months of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged on furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entered his 1,000 friends at the masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene at the masquerade, but first let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite, in many places, however, such suites from a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bazaar. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and yet at each turn a novel effect. To the right and the left, in the middle of each wall, was a tall and narrow Gothic window, looked out upon a closed corridor, which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were stained glass, whose colors varied in accordance to the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, a vividly blue. Big Diddy got the window. That's a GF we all need. The big titty window. And vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple, in its ornaments and tapestries, and there the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were its casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet, the seventh apparently was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds on the carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber, only the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in none of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candle burn. Among the profusion of gold ornaments that lay scattered to and fro, or dependent on the roof, there was no light of any kind of emanating from the lamp or candle without the suite of chambers, but in the corridors that followed suit. There stood, opposite each window, a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that protected its rays through the tinted glass so narrowly illuminated the room, and thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a light upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were a few of the company bold enough to set foot within the precincts of it all. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony, its pendulum 18th century literature, boys. Fuck. To and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand clock and when the minute hand made a circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep, and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that each lapse of an hour the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzes perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconnect of the whole gay company. The whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed at the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused retrieve or meditation. Edgar Cowan Sussy. Yeah. I could talk about him for a bit. He got real sussy for a moment. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled, as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, each to each other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce to them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600... Okay, apparently I can't say 1,000 today. Awesome. In 600 seconds of times that flies, that came yet another chiming of the clock, and then there were the same disconcert and tumultuous and meditation as before. But in spite of these things, it was as gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions grew with barbaric lustre. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. hold on. Let me just reread that sentence. Okay. Okay. I don't remember that sentence of like his dude's followers having to be like, are you still okay? Boy. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the seven chambers upon occasion of this great feat, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter, and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has been seen in the Hernani. Hernani. Yep, Hernani. I just said Nani. Uh, there was an arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fantasies, such as the madman fashions. There was as much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little bit of that which might have exceeded disgust. To and fro, and in 7 chambers, there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from room to room, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of each of their steps. And, anon, there strikes the ebony clock, which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then for a moment all is still, and all is silent, save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have eluded and endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now, again the music swells, and the dreams live, and writher to and fro more merely than ever, taking hue from the many-tinted windows through which steam of rays from the tripods, but to the chamber which lies mostly westward of the 7, there are now none of the maskers who venture for the night is waning away, and there flows the ruder light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls, and to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal, more solely empathetic than any which reaches the ears who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirringly on until the length that commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all these things before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more of thought crept within more of time, into the meditations of a thoughtful among those who revelled, and thus, too, it happened, perhaps, that more the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence. There were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure, which had arrested the attention of no single individual before, and the rumor of this new presence, having spread itself whisperingly around, there across the length of the whole company, a buzz or murmur, expressive of disproportion and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms, such as I have painted, it may as well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had outhorred Herod and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite doctrine. There were chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion, even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests. There are matters in which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to toe in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closeted scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured if not approved by the mad revels around. But the murmur had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with the features of a face, was besprinkled with a scarlet horror. When the eyes of the Prince Prospero fell upon the spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movements, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed in the moment with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but in the next to his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely, of the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know who we have to hang at sunrise for this battlements." It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero. As he uttered these words, they rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the wave of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rustling movement of the group in the direction of the intruder, who, at this moment, was also near at hand, and now, with a deliberate and stately step, made a closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe, with which the mad assumptions of the murmur had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that unimpeded he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the room to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which was distinguished from him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through, and this again, to the white, and even hence to the violet era. A decided moment had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon them all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impunity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turning suddenly to confront his pursuer, there was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped, gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate, both are bad, in death of the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of revelers at the once threw themselves into the black apartment. Summoning courage without the revelers, the death of the... Yeah, threw themselves in the black apartment, and seizing the murmur, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which had handled so violently the rudeness untainted. It can be. Like I said, this is 18th century. This is Victorian. I don't know why it blocked nice, by the way. It got erect, but it did not get nice. It got nice. Yeah, oh my god. Like I said, it's 18th century Victorian literature. So a lot of this is like, how would I put this? Everybody has a different way of writing, and Edgar Allan Poe is both dark, but he also uses a lot of ands and a lot of interesting words. A lot of them are what he would have said, but he does have a lot of run-on and repeating sentences, and I'm just kind of here like, brain, brain, brain. Grasp these words for me, please. I'm generally a slow reader, but I tend to read better when reading out loud, I guess. But, I mean, also, I guess excuse, but not really, because I just like books. I mean, I like literature, because a part of me on my off time does try to be a writer. And by try, I have the same issue as all writers have. Actually writing. Untainted in any tangible form, and now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bewetted halls of their revel, and died each in despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, as darkness and decay and the Red Death, hell, illuminable dominion over all. Yeah, I tend to have a lot of side, like a lot of plots I would love to expand and then just never do. Or like I have bigger projects. There it is. I have like bigger projects that I want to finish, and then it's just like, do I have time? I don't know. But that is usually just me. I'm just gonna shift myself a bit better. Just so that I am not only more comfortable, but also more in the way. Or more in the way. Gotta get into that gremlin reading style. Oh, damn. I could kind of say similar. No, I restarted my horror one 2 years ago. And that one kind of needs to get work on. I do need to do the second book of the light novel, and my one poetry book just needs artwork. I keep saying, and I'm like, I could do that. I've been working on Illustrator for the past while, but no, not doing that, I suppose. The Cask of Amontillado. The Thousand Industry. Let me get my brain to connect for 5 seconds. Ooh, I've seen people play Red Rose. I haven't played it myself, but that looks so cool. That's interesting. The one I'm working on is how would I put it? Basically, it's a cursed forest. It's a cursed forest for sure. Full of monsters. But how they operate is interesting, I guess, without being like, oh, oh no, because I think I remember there's a Red Rose that is there was a video game. I didn't know he had a movie though. That's interesting. The Thousand Injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well knew the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to that threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitely settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved preluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. Yes. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on the connoisseurship of wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity, to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gimmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. Wow, this whole sentence was like, hey, yeah, fuck Italians, I guess. Okay. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. Honestly, fair. I love writing dark shit, and that shouldn't be something I put into, like, everything, but, like, it's so fun. Like, my light novel is very dark. It is very dark. But also, I guess, kind of okay. I don't know. In this respect, I did not differ from him maternally. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk one evening during the supreme madness of the carnival season that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking too much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting partier striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are lucky met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" he said. "Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible! And in the middle of the carnival?" "I have my doubts," I replied. "And I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain. Amontillado? I have my doubts. Amontillado, and I must satisfy them. Amontillado. As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucchesi. Yes. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me. Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from a sherry. And yet some fools will have it, and his taste is a match for your own. Come, let us go." "Whither?" "To your vaults." "My friend, no. I will not impose you upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement in Lucchesi." "I have no engagement. Come." I might only read like some of his more popular stuff just because I totally forgot words, but I do have another book from last reading that I can get to. And maybe we could see if we finish that today. We'll see. Maybe add a few of my own because they are spooky ghost stories after all. "My friend, no, it is not the engagement, but the severe cold in which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp, and they are encrusted with nitre. Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado. You have been imposed upon, and as for Lucchesi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado." Just your fucking repeat. Yeah. No worries. Thus speaking, Fortunato posed himself of my arm, putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire close about my person. I suffered him to hurry me to my plazo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return until morning, and have given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their scones 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. He came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together on the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells on his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe," said he. "It is further on," said I. "But observe the white web work which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned to me, and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs, and distilled the hue of intoxication. "Yeah, no worries. Enjoy your meal, man." "Nitre?" he asked at length. "Nitre," I replied. "How long have you had that cough?" Ugh, 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 ugh. Oh wow, that's a lot of ughs. Ugh, 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 ugh. My poor friend had found it impossible to reply for many minutes. "It is nothing," he said at last. "Okay, sure." "Come," I said with a decision. "We will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Luceshi. Enough, he said. The cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough. True, true, I replied. And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily, but you should use all proper caution. A draught of this Medoc will defend us from the damps. Here I knocked off the neck of the bottle and drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mould. Drink, said I, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer and paused, nodded at me familiarly while the bells jingled. I drink, he said, to be buried that repose around us, and I to your long life. He took my arm, and we proceeded. These vaults, he says, are extensive. The Montreuilsors, I replied, were the great and numerous families. I forget your arms. A huge human foot door. In a field of azure, a foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel. And the motto? Nemo me impune laceat. And that's right. It's like, oh shit, I summoned a demon. Great. Good, he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes and his bell jingled. My own fancy grew warm, and with the Medoc, we had passed through the walls of piled bones with cast and puncheons of intimidating. Either my brain cells are not connecting, or this is alright. Alright. Intermingling into the inmost recesses of the catacombs, I paused again, and this time I made a bold to seize Fortunato by the arm above the elbow. The night tree, I said. See, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it is too late. Your cough is nothing, he said. Let us go. But first, another draught of Medoc. I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it in a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. You do not comprehend, he said. No, I replied. Not I replied. Then you are not of the Brotherhood. How? You are not of the Masons. Yes, yes, I said. Yes, yes. You? Impossible? A Mason? A Mason, I replied. A sign, he said. It is this, I answered, producing a trowel from beneath the folds of my roquelier. You jest, he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. But let us proceed to the Amontillado. Be it so, I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak, and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily, and we continued our route to search for the Amontillado. We passed through the range of the low arches, descended past on, and descending again arrived at the deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau rather the glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains piled to the vault overhead in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th of the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior recess. In the depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no especial use in itself, but formed merely the interval between two of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depths of the recesses. Its termination, the feeble light did not enable us to see. Proceed, I said. Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucchesi, he is an Ingormagus, interrupted my friend, as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed him immediately at his heels. In an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had fretted him to the granite. In its surface were two iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally, from when one of these depended a short chain came from the other padlock. Throwing the links around his wrist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astonished to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recesses. Pass your hand, I said. Over the wall you cannot help feeling the nitre. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return. No? Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power. The Amontillado, ejected my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. True, I replied. The Amontillado. As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I have before spoken. Throwing them aside, I stood, uncovered, a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials, and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of my masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in a great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depths of the recess. It was not a cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier, and then the third, and then the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I eased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clinking subsided, I resumed the trowel, and finished without interruption the 5th, the 6th, the 7th tier. The wall was now nearly upon the level with my breast. I again paused in holding up the flambeau over the mason work, threw a feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud shrills and screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of the instant reassured me. I placed my hand on the solid fabric of the catacombs, and felt satisfied. I reproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the calmer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a proportion of the last and of the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially on its destined position. But now there came out of the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty recognizing as that of the of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "Ha ha ha, hee hee, a very good joke indeed, an excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh at the palazzo, hee hee, over our wine, hee hee." "The Amontillado," I said. "Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be awaiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone." "Yes," I said, "let us be gone." "For the love of God, Montiessor." "Yes," I said, "for the love of God." But to those words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, "Fortunato!" No answer. I called again, "Fortunato!" No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingle of the bells. My heart grew sick on the account of the dampness in the catacombs. I hastened to make an end to my labor. I forced the last stone into position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry I erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of the century no mortal has disturbed them. In peace, request. Don't mind me, I'm just looking for the next stories. 183. Impia torturam longos hic tuba furios sanguinis inocie nosatuita aluit sospite nui partia fracto nunci friones antro mors ubi dara fut vita salquest petent. Oh, this is Pit and Pendulum, by the way. Quatrain composed of the gates of a market to be erected upon the site of the Jacobean clubhouse at Paris. I was sick, sick unto death with that long agony, and when they at length unbounded me, and I was permitted to sit, I felt that my senses were leaving me. The sentence, the dreaded sentence of death, was the last of distinct accentuation which reached my ears. After that, the sound of the inconsiderable voices seemed to merge in one dreamy, indeterminate hum. It conveyed to my soul the idea of revolution, perhaps from the association in fancy with the blur of a mill wheel. This only for a brief period, for presently I heard no more. Yet for a while I saw, but with how terrible an exaggeration, I saw the lips of the black-robed judges. They appeared to me whiter than the sheet upon which I traced these words, and thin, even the grotesqueness, thin with the intensity of their expression of firmness, of immovable resolution, of stern contempt of human torture. I saw that the decrees of what to me was fate were still ensuing from those lips. I saw them writhe with a deadly locution. I saw them fashion with syllables of my name, and I shuddered because no sound succeeded. I saw, too, for a few moments of delirious horror, the soft and nearly impeccable waving of the sable draperies which entwined the walls of the apartment. And then my vision fell upon the 7 tall candles upon the table. At first They wore the aspect of charity, and seemed white and slender angels who would save me. But then, all at once, there came a most deadly nausea over my spirit, and I felt every fiber in my figure thrill as if I had touched the wire of a galvanic battery, while the angel forms became meaningless specters with heads of flame, and I saw that from them there would be no help. And then there stole into my fancy, like a rich musical note, the thought of what sweet rest there must be in the grave. The thought came gently and stealthily, and it seemed long before it attained full appreciation. But just as my spirit came at length properly to feel and entertain it, the figures of the judges vanished, as if magically from before me. The tall candles sank into nothingness. Their flames went out utterly. The blackness of darkness circumvened. All sensations appeared swallowed up in the mad rushing descent as the soul into Hades. Then suddenly, in stillness, night were the universe. I had swooned, but still would not stay. All the consciousness was lost. What of it there remained I will not attempt to define, or even to describe, yet all was not lost. In the deepest slumber, no. In delirium, no. In a swoon, no. In death, no. Even in the grave, all is not lost. Else there is no immortality for man. Arousing from the most profound of slumbers, we break the gossamer web of some dream. Yet, in a second afterward, so frail may that web have been, we remember not that we have dreamed. In return to life, the swoon, there are two stages. First, that the sense of mental or spiritual. Secondly, that in the sense of physical existence. It seems probable that, if upon reaching the second stage, we could recall the impressions of the first, we should find these impressions eloquent, in memories of the gulf beyond. And the gulf is what? How, at last, shall we distinguish it from the shadows? From those of the tomb, but if the impressions of what I have termed the first stage are not at will recalled, yet, after long interval, they do not come unbidden. Wow, we marvel whence they come. He who has never swooned is not he who finds strange palaces and widely familiar faces in cools that glow. Is not he who beholds floating in mid-air the sad visions that many may not view. Is not he who ponders over the perfume of some novel flower. Is not he whose brain grows bewildered with the meaning of some musical cadence which has never before arrested his attention. Amid frequent and thoughtful endeavors to remember, amid earnest struggles to regather some token of the state of seeming nothingness into which my soul had lapsed, there have never been moments when I have dreamed of success. There have been very brief periods when I have conjured up remembrances with which the lucid reason of a letter impoached assures me could have references only the condition of seeing the unconsciousness. These shadows of memory tell indistinctly of tall figures that have lifted and bore me in silence down, still down, till a hideous dizziness oppresses me at the mere idea of the intermedials of descent. They tell so also of the vague horror of my heart, on an account of that heart's unnatural stillness. Then comes the sense of sudden motionless throughout all things, as if those who bore me, a ghastly train, had outrun in their descent the limits of the limitlessness, and paused from the wearisomeness of their toil. After this, I call to mind flatness and dampness, and then all is madness. The madness of memory, which busies itself among forbidden things. Very suddenly, there came back into my soul motion and sound, the tumultuous motion of the heart, and, in my ears, the sound of its beating. Then a pause in which all is blank. Then, again, sound and motion, and touch, a tingling sensation pervading my frame. Then the mere consciousness of existence without thought, a condition which lasted long. Then, very suddenly, throughout the shuddering terror and earnest of endeavor to comprehend my true state, then a strong desire to lapse into insensibility. Then a rushing revel of sound and successful effort to move. And now a full memory of insensibility. A full memory of the trial. Utter terror. Of the judges, of the sable draperies, of the sentence, of the sickness, of the swoon, then entire forgetfulness of all that followed, of all that later day, much earnest and endeavor have enabled me vaguely to recall. So far had I not opened my eyes, I felt that I lay upon my back, unbounded. I reached out from my hand, and it fell heavily upon something damp and hard. There I suffered it to remain for many minutes, while I strove to imagine where and what I could be. I long yet dared not to employ my vision. I dreaded the first glance at objects around me. It was not that I feared to look upon things horrible, but that I grew aghast, lest there should be nothing to see. At length, with a wild desperation at heart, I that quickly unclosed my eyes. My worst thoughts then were confirmed. The blackness of eternal night encompassed me. I struggled for breath. The intensity of the darkness seemed to oppress and stifle me. The atmosphere was intolerably close. I still lay quietly and made effort to exercise my reason. I brought to mind the inquisitorial proceedings and attempted from that point to deduce my real condition. The sentence had passed, and it appeared to me that a very long interval of time had since elapsed. Yet not for a moment did I suppose myself actually dead. Such a suspicion, notwithstanding what we read in fiction, is altogether inconsistent with the real existence. But where and in what state was I? The condemned to death, I knew, perished usually at the autos de fe, and one of these had been held on to the night of the day of my trial. Had I been reminded of my dungeon to await the next sacrifice, which would not take place for many months, this I at once saw could not be. Victims had been in immediate demand. Moreover, my dungeon, as well as the condemned cells at Toledo, had stone floors, and light was not altogether exclusive. A fearful idea now suddenly drove the blood in torrents upon my heart. For a brief period I once more relapsed into insensibility. Upon recovering, I at once started to my feet. Trembling convulsively in every fibre, I thrust my arms wildly above and around me in all directions. I felt nothing, yet dreaded to move a step, lest I should be impeded by the walls of a tomb. Perspiration burst from every pore and stood in cold, big beads upon my forehead. The agony of suspense grew, at length, intolerable, and I cautiously moved forward with my arms extended. and my eyes straining from their sockets. In a hope of catching some faintly ray of light, I proceeded for many paces, but still all was blackness and vacancy. I breathed more freely. It seemed evident that mine was not, at least, the most hideous of fates. And now, as I still continued to step cautiously onward, there came thronging upon my recollection 1,000 vague rumors of the horrors of Toledo, of the dungeons that had been strange things, narrated fables. I had always deemed them, but yet strange and too ghastly to repeat, save in a whisper. Hey, Lep, how's it going? Was I left to perish of starvation in this subterranean world of darkness, or what fate, perhaps even more fearful, awaited me? That the result would be death, and a death of more than customary bitterness. I knew too well the character of my judges to doubt. The mode and the hour were at the occupied or distract of me. My outstretched hands and length encountered some solid obstruction. It was a wall seemingly of stone masonry, very smooth, slimy, and cold. I followed it up, stepping with all the careful distrust with which certain antique narratives had inspired me. This process, however, afforded me no means of ascertaining the dimensions of my dungeon, as I might make its circuit and return to the point whence I set out without being aware of the fact. So perfectly uniform seemed the wall. I, therefore, sought the knife which had been in my pocket when led into the inquisitorial chamber. But it was gone. My clothes had been exchanged for a wrapper of coarse serge. I had thought with forcing the blade in some minute crevice of the masonry, so as to identify my point of departure. The difficulty, nevertheless, was but trivial, although, in the disorder of my fancy, it seemed at first insurable. I tore part of the hem from the robe and placed the fragment at full length. Hell yeah, pizza and beer is always good. Also, thank you for the bits. You don't have to keep throwing bits at me. Also, pizza and beer sound good right now. I tore apart the hem of the robe and placed a fragment at full length and at right angles to the wall. In groping my way around the prison, I could not fail to encounter this rag upon completing the circuit. So, at least, I thought, but I had not counted upon the extent of the dungeon, or upon my own weakness. The ground was moist and slippery. I staggered onward for some time, when I stumbled and fell. My excessive fatigue induced me to remain prostrate, and I slept soon overtook me where I lay. Upon awakening and stretching forth an arm, I found beside me a loaf and a pitcher of water. I was too much exhausted to reflect upon this circumstance, but ate and drank with avidity. Shortly afterwards, I resumed my tour of the prison, and with much toil came upon the fragments of the serge. Up to the period where I fell, I counted 52 paces, and upon resuming my walk, I counted 48 more. When I arrived at the rag, there were in all, then, 100 paces, and omitting 2 more paces to the yard,
I presumed the dungeon to be 50 yards in circuit. I had met, however, with many angles in the wall, and thus I could form no guess at the shape of the vault, for the vault I could not help supposing it to be. I had little object, clearly, no hope. I had little object, certainly no hope these reaches, but vague curiosity prompted me to continue them. Quitting the wall, I resolved to cross the area of the enclosure. At first, I proceeded with extreme caution, for the floor, although seemingly a solid material, was treacherous with slime. At length, however, I took courage and did not hesitate to step firmly, endeavoring to cross in as direct a hem of my robe became entangled between my legs. I stepped on it and fell violently on my face. In the confusion attending my fall, I did not immediately apprehend a somewhat startling circumstance, which yet, in a few seconds afterwards, and while I lay prostrate, arrested my attention. It was this: my chin rested upon the floor of the prison, but my lips and the upper portion of my head, although seemingly at less elevation than the chin, touched nothing. At the same time, my forehead seemed bathed in a clammy vapor, and the peculiar smell of decay fungus arose to my nostrils. I put forward my arm and shuddered to find that I had fallen to the very brink of the circular pit, whose extensive course was, I had no means of ascertaining at the moment. Groping about the masonry just below the margin, I succeeded in dislodging a small fragment, and let it fall into the abyss. For many seconds I hearkened to its reverberations as it dashed against the sides of the chasm in its descent. At length there was a sullen plunge into the water, succeeded by the loud echoes. At the same moment there came a sound resembling the quick opening as a rapid closing of the door overhead, while the faint gleam of light flashed suddenly through the gloom and as suddenly faded away. I saw clearly the doom which had been prepared for me, and congratulated myself upon the timely accident by which I had escaped. Another step before my fall, and there would have been me no more, and the death was avoided. Was that the character which I had regarded as a fabulous and frivolous in the tales respecting the Inquisition? To the victims of its tyranny was a choice of death, with its direct physical agonies, or death with its most hideous mortal horrors. I had been reserved for the latter. By long suffering my nerves had been untrusting until I trembled at the sound of my own voice, and had become in every respect a fitting subject for the species of torture which awaited me. Shaking in every limb, I groped my way back to the wall, resolving there to perish rather than risk the terrors of these wells, of which my imagination now pictured many in various positions throughout the dungeon. In other conditions of my mind, I might have had the courage to end my misery at once by plunge into the depths of the abyss.
I don't remember the story being this long, but okay. But now I was in the versities of cowards. Neither could I forget what I had read of these pits, that the sudden extinction of life formed no part of their most horrible plan. Agitation of the spirit kept me awake for many long hours, but at length I again slumbered. Upon arousing, I found my side, as before, a loaf and a pitcher of water. A burning thirst consumed me, and I emptied the vessel at a draught. It must
have been drugged, for scarcely had I drunk before I became irresistibly drowsy. A deep sleep fell upon me, a sleep like that of death. How long had it lasted, of course, I know not, but when I once again I unclosed my eyes, the objects around me were visible. By wild surface lustre, the origin of which I could not first determine, I was enabled to see the extent and the aspect of the prison. In its size I had been greatly mistaken. The whole circuit of its walls did not exceed 25 yards. For some minutes this facet occasioned me a world of vain trouble, vain indeed. For what could be of less importance under the terrible circumstances which environed me than the mere dimensions of my dungeon? But my soul took a wild interest in trifles, and I busied myself in endeavors to account for the error I had committed in my measurement. The truth at length flashed upon me. In my first attempt at exploration, I had counted 52 paces, up to the period when I fell. I must then have been within a pace or two of the fragment of serge. In fact, I had nearly performed the circuit of the vault. I then slept, and upon awakening, I must have returned upon my steps, thus supposing the circuit nearly doubled what it actually was. My confusion of mind prevented me from observing that I began my tour with a wall to the left, and it ended with a wall to the right. I had been deceived, too, in respect to the shape of the enclosure. In feeling my way, I had found many angles, and thus deduced an idea of great irregularity. So potent is the effect of total darkness upon one arousing form, lethargy or sleep. The angles were simply those of a few slight depressions or niches at odd intervals. The general shape of the prison was square. What I had heard taken for masonry seemed now to be iron, or some other metal, in huge plates whose structures or joints occasioned the depression. The entire surface of the metallic enclosure was rudely daubed in all the hideous and repulsive devices of which the charnel superstition of the monks had given rise. The figures of fiends in aspects of menace, with skeletal forms and other more really fearful images, overspread the disfigured walls. I observed that the outlines of these monstrosities were sufficiently distinct, but that the colors seemed faded and blurred, as if it was from the effects of a damp atmosphere. I now noticed the floor too, which was of stone. In the center yawned the circular pit. From those jaws that I had escaped, I was the only one in the dungeon. All this I saw indistinctly and by much effort, for my personal condition I had been greatly changed during slumber. I now lay upon my back, and at full length, on a species of low framework of wood. To this I was securely bounded by a long strap resembling a surgical. It passed in many convolutions about my limbs and body, leaving at liberty only my head and my left arm to such an extent that I could, by dint of much exertion, supply myself with food from the earthen dish which lay by my side on the floor. I saw to my horror that the pitcher had been removed. I say to my horror, for I was consumed with intolerable thirst. This thirst, it appeared to be the design of my persecutors to stimulate, for the food in the dish was meat pungently seasoned. Looking upward, I surveyed the ceiling in my prison. It was some 30 or 40. Is this the one I think it was? Or was that a poem? I think it was a poem. He sounds like he needs a lot more than just a beer. I'm like here like so this dude is getting tortured, but I thought it was maybe it's a different one that I was thinking of. I'll finish it for sure, but it's just huh. I Isn't this supposed to be the one about the heart and the floorboard? No, I don't know. That's a different one. Oh. What was that one? Because I'm reading it and I'm just like, huh. Oh, yeah, it was. I mistook it for a different one. Alright, well, we'll still finish it. I low-key kind of don't know what's going on. I just know the dude is like strapped to a table. Yeah, Telltale Heart. I saw it. I was looking through the chapter and I was like, yeah, that's what it was. I mean, there's only a few pages of this one left, although... Jesus Christ, Edgar. Looking upward, I surveyed the ceiling of my prison. It was some 30 or 40 feet overhead, and the construction, much of these walls, one of these... Oh, I remember reading it. A slight noise attracted my notice, and looking to the floor, I saw several enormous rats traversing it. They had issued from the well, which lay just within view of my right. Even then, I gazed. They came up in troops, hurriedly and ravenous eyes, allured by the scent of the meat. For this is required much effort and attention to scare them away. It might have been half an hour, perhaps even an hour, for I could take but imperfect note of time, before I again cast my eyes upward. What I then saw confounded and amazed me. You know what? I kind of got into it because I was like, hey, is this supposed to be the story where the dude murders the other guy? And then it was just like, no, this guy's getting tortured. Huh. Maybe I was getting too swept up in the aspect of the torture to be like, yes, wrong story. Oh well. The sweep of the pendulum had increased at an extent by nearly a yard. As a natural consequence, its velocity was also much greater. But what mainly disturbed me was the idea that had perceptibly descended. I now observed with a horror, it is needless to say, that it is neither extremity or formed that its neither extremity was formed of a crescent of glittering steel, about a foot in length from horn to horn, the horns upward to the under edge, evidently as keen as that of a razor. Like a razor also, he's getting the real fucked stuff. Like a razor, it seemed massy and heavy, tapering from the edge to a solid and broad structure above. It was appended to a weighty rod of brass, and the whole hissed as it swung throughout the air. I could no longer doubt the doom prepared for me by the monkish ingenuity in torture. My cognizance of the pit had become known to the inquisitorial agents, the pit whose horrors had been disdained for so bold as a rescuant myself, the pit typical of hell and regarded by rumors as the ultima thule of all punishments. The plunge into this pit I had avoided by the merriest of accidents. I had known that surprise or entrapment into torment formed an important portion of all the grotesque of these dungeon deaths had failed to fall. It was no part of the demon plan to hurl me into the abyss, and thus, there had being no alternative, a different and a milder destruction awaited me. Milder, I half smiled in my agony as I thought of such application of such a term. What boots is it to tell of the long, long hours of horror more than mortal during which I counted the rushing vibrations of the steel, inch by inch, line by line, with a descent only appreciable at intervals that seemed ages down, and still down it came. Days passed. It might have been even many days passed, ere it swept so closely over me as to fan me with its arcid breath. The odor of the sharp steel forced itself into my nostrils. I prayed. I wearied heaven for my prayer, for it was more speedy descent. I grew frantically mad, and struggled to force myself upward against the sweep of the fearful scimitar. And then I fell, suddenly calm, and lay smiling at the glittering death, as a child at some rare bauble. There was another interval of utter insensibility. It was a brief, for, upon again lapsing into life there had been no perceptible descent of the pendulum, but it might have been long, for I knew there were demons who took note of my swoon, and who could have arrested the vibration at pleasure. Upon my recovery, too, I felt very, inexplicably sick and weak, as if though long inanitions, even amid the agonies of that period, the human nature craved food. With painful effort, I outstretched my arm as far as my bounds permitted, and took possession of the small remnant which had been spared me by the rats. As I put a portion of it within my lips, there rushed to my mind a half-formed thought of joy, of hope. Yet, what business had I to hope? It was, as I say, a half-formed thought. Man has many such a hope, yet what business had I with hope? It was, as I say, a half-formed thought. Man has many such of which never completed. I felt that it was joy, of hope, but felt also that I had perished in its formation. In vain I struggled to protect, to regain it. Long suffering had nearly annihilated all my ordinary powers of mind. I was an imbecile, an idiot. The vibration of the pendulum was at right angles to my length. I saw that the crescent was designed to cross the region of the heart, it would fray, and the surge of my robe. It would return and repeat its operation again and again, notwithstanding terrifyingly wide sweep, from 30 feet or more, and the hissing vigor of its descent, sufficient to sunder these very walls of iron. Still, the fraying of my robe would be all that, for several minutes, it would accomplish. And at this thought I paused. I dare not go further than this reflection. I dwelt upon it with personality of attention, as if in so dwelling I could arrest here and descent of the steel. I forced myself to ponder upon the sound of the crescent as it should pass across the garment, upon the particular thrilling sensation which the friction of cloths produces on the nerves. I ponder upon all this frivolity until my teeth were on edge. Down steadily, down it crept. I took a frenzied pleasure in constraining it downward with its literal velocity. To the right, to the left, far and wide, with a shriek of the damned spirit, to my heart with the stealthily pace of a tiger. I alternately laughed and howled as one of the other ideas grew prominent. Down, certainly, relentlessly down, it vibrated within 3 inches of my bosom. I struggled violently, furiously, to free my left arm. This was free only from the elbow to the hand. I could reach the latter from the platter beside me, to my mouth with great effort, but no further. Could I have broken the fastenings above the elbow, I would have seized the attempt to arrest the pendulum. I might as well have attempted to arrest the avalanche. Down, still, increasingly still, inevitably down. I grasped and struggled at each vibration. I shrunk convulsively at its very sweep. My eyes followed its outward or upward whirls with the eagerness of the most unmeaning despair. They closed themselves spasmodiously at the descent, although death would have been a relief. Oh, how unspeakable! Still I quivered in every nerve to think of how slight the sinking of machinery would have precipitated that keen, glistening axe upon my bosom. It was hope that prompted the nerve to quiver, the frame to shrink. It was hope, the hope that triumphs on the rack, that whispers to the death condemned, even in the dungeons of the Inquisition. I saw that some 10 or 12 vibrations would bring the steel in actual contact with my robe, and with this observation there suddenly came over my spirit all the keen collected calmness of despair. For the first time during my many hours, or perhaps days, I thought, it now occurred to me that for the first time during my many hours, that the bandage or surgical which enveloped me was unique. I was tied with no separate cord. The first stroke of the razor-like crescent at any position of the band would so detach it that it might be unwound from my person, and by means of my left hand. But how fearful in that case the proximity of the steel, the result of the slightest struggle, how deadly! Was it likely, moreover, that the minions of torture had not foreseen and provided for this possibility? Was it probable that the bandage crossed my bosom in the track of the pendulum, dreading to find my faint, and, as it seemed in the last hope frustrated, I so far elevated my head as to obtain a distinct view of my breast. The surgical envelope enveloped my limbs and body, close in all directions, save in the path of destroying crescent. Scarcely had I dropped my head back into its original position, when there flashed upon my mind what I cannot better describe than as an unformed half of that idea of deliverance, to which I have previously alluded, and of which many a mote only floated intermediately through my brain when I raised my food to my burning lips. The whole thought was now present, feeble, scarcely sane, scarcely definite, but still entire. I proceeded at once, with a nervous energy of despair, to attempt its execution. For many hours the immediate vicinity of the low framework upon which I lay had been literally swarming with rats. They were wild, bold, ravenous, their red eyes glaring upon me as if they waited but for motionlessness on my part to make me their prey. To what food, I thought, have they been accustomed in this well? They had devoured, in spite of all my efforts to prevent them, all but the small remnant of the contents of the dish. I had fallen into a habitual seesaw or wave of the hand about the platter, and at length the unconscious uninformatory of the movement deprived it in effect. In the voracity, the vermin frequently fastened their sharp fangs in my fingers. With the particles of the oily and spicy viand which now remained, I thoroughly rubbed the bandage whenever I could reach it. Then, raising my hand from the floor, I lay breathlessly still. At first the ravenous animals were startled and terrified at the change. At the cessation of movement, they shrank alarmingly back. Many thought the well. But this was only for a moment. I had not counted the vein upon their voracity. Observing that I remained without motion, one or two of the boldest leaped upon the framework and smelt the surgical. This seemed the signal for the general rush. Forth and from the well they hurried in fresh troops. They clung to the wood, they overran it, and leaped in hundreds upon my person. The measured movement of the pendulum disturbed them, not at all. Avoiding its strokes, they busied themselves with the anointed bandage. They pressed, they swarmed upon me in the ever-accumulating heaps. They writhed upon my throat. Their cold lips sought my own. I was half stifled by their thronging pressure. Disgust, for which the world has no name, swelled my bosom, and chilled with a heavy calmness of my heart. Yet 1 minute, and I felt the struggle would be over. Plainly, I perceived the loosening of the bandages. I knew that in more than one place it must have already been severed. With a more than human resolution, I lay still. Nor had I erred at my calculations, nor had I endured in vain. I at length felt I was free. The surgical hung in ribands from my body, but the stroke of the pendulum already pressed upon my bosom. It had divided the serge of the robe. It had cut through the linen beneath. Twice again it swung, and a sharp sense of pain shot through every nerve. But the moment of escape had arrived. At a wave of my hand, my deliverers hurried tumultuously away, with a steady movement, cautious, sidelonging, shrieking, and slow. I slid from the embrace of the bandage and beyond the reach of the scimitar. For a moment, at least, I was free. Free, and in the grasp of the Inquisition. I had scarcely stepped from my wooden bed of horror upon the stone floor of the prison, when the motion of the hellish machine ceased, and I beheld it drawn up, by some invisible force, through the ceiling. This was a lesson which I took desperately to heart. My every motion was undoubtedly watched. Free. I had but escaped death in one form of agony. To be delivered unto worse than death in some or other. With that thought, I rolled my eaves nervously around on the barriers of iron that hemmed me in. Something unusual, some change with it. At first, I could not appreciate distinctly. It was obvious, had taken place in the apartment. For many minutes of the dreamy and trembling abstraction, I busied myself in vain, unconnected conjecture. During this period, I became aware, for the first time, of the origin of the sulphurous light which illuminated the cell. It proceeded to form a fissure about half an inch in width, exceeding entirely around the prison at the base of the walls, which thus appeared and were completely separate from the floor. I endeavored, but, of course, in vain, to look through the aperture. As I arose from the attempt, the mystery of the alteration in the chamber broke at once upon my understanding. I have observed that, although the outlines in the figures upon the walls were sufficiently distinct, yet the colors seemed blurred and indefinite. These colors had now assumed, and were momentarily assuming, a startling and most intense brilliancy that gave to the spectral of fiendish portionaries and an aspect that might have thrilled even firmer nerves of my own. Demon eyes of a wild and ghastly vicinity glared upon me in 1,000 directions, where none had been visible before, and gleamed with the lurid luster of that fire that I could not force my imagination to regard as unreal. Unreal. Even while I breathed, there came to my nostrils the breath of vapor of heated iron. The suffocating odor pervaded the prison. A deep glow settled each moment in the eyes that glared at my agonies. A richer tint of crimson diffused itself over the pictured horrors of blood. I panted. I gasped for breath. There could be no doubt the design of my tormentors. Oh, most unrelenting. Oh, most demonic of men. I shrank from the glowing metal to the center of the cell. Amid the thought of the fiery destruction that impeded, the idea of the coolness of the well came over my soul like balm. I rushed to this deadly brink and threw my straining vision below. The glare of the enkindled roof illuminated its inmost recesses. Yet, for a wild moment, did my spirit refuse to comprehend the meaning of what I saw. At length it wrestled its way onto my soul. It buried itself upon my shoulders, my shuddering reasoning. Oh, for a voice to speak! Oh, horror! Oh, any horror but this! With a shriek I rushed to the margin and buried my face in the hands, weeping bitterly. The heat rapidly increased, and once again I looked up, shuddering as with a fit of ague. There had been a second change in the cell, and now the change was obviously in the form. As before, it was in vain that I, at first, endeavored to appreciate or understand what was taking place. But not long was I left in doubt. The inquisitorial vengeance had been hurried by my twofold escape, and there was to be no more dallying with the King of Terrors. The room had been square. I saw that 2 of its iron angles were now acute. 2 consequently obtuse. And the fearful difference quickly increased with a low rumbling or moaning sound. In an instant, the apartment had shifted from its form into that of a lozenge. Okay. But the alteration stopped not here. I neither hoped nor desired it to stop. I could have collapsed the red walls to my bosom with a garment of internal peace. Death, I said, any death but that of the pit. Fool, might I have not known that into the pit it was the object of the burning iron to urge me? Could I resist its glow, or, if even, could I withstand its pressure? And now, flatter and flatter grew the lozenge, with a rapidity that left me no time for contemplation. Its center, of course, its greatest width, came just over the yawning gulf. I shrank back, but the closing walls pressed me relentlessly onward. At length of my seared and writhing body, there was no longer an inch of foothold. On the firm floor of the prison I struggled no more, but the agony of my soul found vent in one long, loud, and final scream of despair. I felt that I tore it upon the brink. I averted my eyes. There was a discordant hum of human voices. There was a loud blast of many trumpets. There was a harsh grating of 1,000 thunders, and the fiery walls rushed back. An outstretched arm caught my own as I fell, fainting into the abyss. It was that of General Lasalle. The French army had entered Toledo. The Inquisition was in the hand of its enemies. She. Okay. I'm going to take a... It's fine. I'm going to take a brief break. And like I said, I'm going to try to do, basically have the ads time me. So we will, I guess because it's the first break, let's do a 3-minute ad and yeah. I mean, it is only for me to time myself because I always feel like I'm either taking too long or I'm not doing it long enough. So it's like, and also when people come into the stream, they don't have to worry about an ad. I found that out like a long time ago, so I'm gonna do that, and maybe the music, I don't know, we'll just do that. Anyway. Yes, Justa gets the joy of not having to. But, like I said, I'm built different.
No, I think you just waited till I hit affiliate, so that, you know, you can start suggesting cursed stuff with, your Prime. Let's go over here. So... Okay. I'm gonna have to take a look to see how those work, because, honestly, I also hate coming into streams with ads, because it's like, please. Yeah, I know. You're also, you're actually two things. You're not only the first sub, you're also the first predominant, channel meme. No worries, no worries. Honestly, there's no pressure. It's just unfortunate that Justa has to get the first. But it is all good. But that also means that, I also don't like the fact that he has edited the emote with glasses. Like, come on. However, when I get, because I have the tier 2 and 3 sub emotes unlocked, in a way I can use that to pressure, just to get tier 3, because guess what's going to be in the tier 3 slot? A nice little sip, but I have yet to do that. Yes, you could take the top bits, and I'm okay with that. Is this gonna be a competition now? Just be like, okay, for this month, who's the first of this? Who's gonna be our first gifted, our gifted sub? Who's gonna be, oh. Trying to think what other things there could be. Can't quite think that. There, now we can get on to the actual story and not the one of the... I'm just vibing. Alright. Now I can get to the actual thing. Or things. Distraction. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease that sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe with how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how the first of the idea entered my brain. Yeah, wait till I get, more channel points unlocked. Or more channel things. I guess while we're here, you guys can start suggesting things, because I will be working on it tomorrow. But there are some things I won't do, but I already have an idea of what one of them will probably be. Or two of them. We'll see. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. Redeeming water. But I'm always drinking water, though. He had never given me insult.
For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had an eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye, with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by digress, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Yeah, it's because people tend to forget to drink water. I constantly drink water because every time I feel my mouth dry up, I hate it. So I know one of them is gonna be like, say whatever I put in chat, and I'm just gonna be like, Justa. I hate the fact that when you fucking I two things came into my head when you put that. I was like, this is either going to be more bang energy or it's gonna be something else. But let's not let's not digress on that. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. With that caution, with that foresight, with what dissimulation, I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I made an offering sufficient for my head, I didn't turn that down, did I? No, I didn't. Let me do that. Oop. Yes, more bang. Amazing. And then, when I had made an offering sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cuttingly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me about an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it, just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye, and this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight, but I found the eye was closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been very profound, old man, indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Interesting. Upon the 8th night, I was more than unusually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than it did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain the feeling of triumph. To think that there I was opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he had heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with a thick darkness, for the shutters were closed, fastened, through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on, steadily, steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprung out of his bed, crying, "Who's there?" I kept quiet and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in his bed listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no. It was the low stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it was well up before my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew that the old man felt and pitied him. Although I chuckled at heart, I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in his bed. His fears had not ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is merely a cricket that has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with those suspicions, but he had found it all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him, and enveloped the victim, and it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until the length of a simple ray, like a thread of a spider, shot from the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinction, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else in the old man's face or person, for I directed the rays, as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you would mistake for madness is but an over-acuteness of the sense? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in a cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier to courage. But even yet I refrained, and I kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless, and tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eve. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of that heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, louder and louder, every instant. The man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now at the dead hour of night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as the extinct of my uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained, and stood still. But the beating grew louder, louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by the neighbor. The man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leapt onto the room. He shrieked once, and once only. In an instant I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily, to find the deed so far done, but for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall, at least, and at length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead, and his eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily out of silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, and the arms, and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber, and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary of that. A tub had caught it all. When I had made an end of the labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking on the street door. I went down and opened it with a light heart. For what have I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves, with perfect suavity, as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police officer, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took all my visitors all over the house. I bade them to search. Search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed him his treasures. Yes, this one is Telltale Heart. This one actually is. I keep forgetting that whenever I read stories with a title, I need to say their name. But yes, this is Telltale Heart, because the dude is now dead. Secure, undistributed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs to the room, and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and, while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But, ere long, I felt myself getting pale, and I wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely, to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness, until at length I found the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently, and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when an envelope in cotton. Yeah. I gasped for breath, and the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more voluptuously, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with more violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited by the fury of the observation of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore, I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting, and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all, and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible that they had not heard? Almighty God, no, no, they had heard. They had suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This, I thought, and this, I think. But anything was better than this. Agony, anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now, again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart. Probably one of my favorites. Well, and of course the Raven. I mean, they're well known, but still. I don't remember what page it was on. Maybe I could just look and, Don't mind me, I just got a little spooked as like half of the book thudded onto my laptop. I was like, oh, okay. True. But it also gets to the point. I guess it's just how I am with my writing style, is I like to get to the point, but still make it interesting.
Yeah. I like how the knife jumps across the screen. I don't know why. It's so dumb. Alright. Saving probably the most well known and best for last. And we can discuss if we want more Poe or if we, another book or ghost stories. Doesn't matter, but once I finish with this, because, good shit. We'll see. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as if some one gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. Distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had thought to borrow from my books a crest of sorrow, sorrow of the lost Lenore, from the rare and radiant maiden who angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. Yeah. It's the one, I'd have to look for memes, but people still make memes about this poem, because I think if I remember, somebody was able to train a raven and they put sunglasses on it, and I'd have to find it. But the quote was, quote, "the raven, swag galore," and I'm like, God damn it. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. So that was now, so still the beating of my heart, I stood, repeating, "'Tis some visitor entering entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entering entrance at my chamber door. 'Tis this, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating, then no longer. "Sir," said I, or "Madame, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact that I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping, tapping at my chamber door." "That I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I open wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into the darkness, peering long, I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream. But the silence was unbroken, and the darkness gave no token, and the only word there spoke was the whisper word, Lenore. This I whispered, and echo murmured back the word, Lenore. Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon I heard again the tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely, that is something at my window lattice. Let me see, then, that what what threat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of lore. Not the least obscene made he, not an instant stopped or stayed he, but with mine of lord or lady perched above my chamber door. Perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. Perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern doctrine of a counteress it wore. "Though thy crust be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven.
ghastly grim, an ancient raven, wandering through the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl, to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet pleased with seeing birds above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such a name as nevermore. But the raven sitting lonely on the placid bust spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour, nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply, so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from the unhappy master who unmercifully disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs on burden bore, till the digress of his hope and melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore. I feel like I remember. I can definitely take a look at that one. Should be in here because I think this is his complete works. But the raven, still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front the bird, and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking that what is ominous bird of yore, what this grim, unguiling, ghastly gaunt of ominous bird of yore, meant in croaking nevermore. Yeah, you're gonna be hearing that a lot. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fallow whose fiery eyes burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head and ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed with an unseen censer, swung by angels whose faint footfalls tickled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, the god hath lent thee, by the angels he has sent thee, respite, respite, the nepentance from the memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind of nepentance, and forgot this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether temper sent or whether tempest tossed, thee are ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted. Tell me truly, I implore. Is there Gom in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by the heaven that bends above us, by the God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if, within the distant Aidenn, it shall clasp a sainted maiden from the angel's name Lenore, clasp the rare and radiant maiden. Me knocking at this dude's door. Like, god damn it. Clasp the rare and radiant maiden whose angel's name Lenore, quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign, a parting bird or fiend, I shriek up staring, get thee back into the tempest of the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul has spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak out my heart, and take thy form off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting, on a pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon that's been dreaming, and the lamplight over him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. In the house of Usher. This book is so heavy. Jesus. I'm just trying to see if I can find the House of Usher. Oh wow, Lenore even has her own thing. Yeah. I feel like somebody just taught that raven to say that and then thought it'd be funny to send it to that guy, and then it just... it did not go well. Also, I like the fact that he was rhyming with the same word. I was like, okay. I don't think the House of Usher is his. There are literally 2 poems that are just 2 dash, 2 dash, and then to the river. Okay. Maybe that's when he got, like, drunk out of his mind and died mysteriously. Okay. Ow. Oh. Gremlin mode. Now I need to give my voice a break. Hold on. Let me do a few things actually. Do that. Pop out for a sec. Still here, just as Arthur likes to call it, invisibility spell. The fall of the House of Usher. Okay, I can try looking at it again. Oh, yeah, it is. 152. Makes it much, much easier to find. Because I was looking just for the House of Usher and I was just like,
knocking stuff around. This thing is... Oh. Oh, this is gonna be a big boy. Big boy story. Damn. Ah, no worries. I know, sometimes... I mean, listen. I forgot Telltale Heart and Pit and the Pendulum were two different stories. I don't know why, but I was just like, yep. That makes sense. That coincides with my brain. Hold on. During the whole of a dull, dark, and soundless day in the autumn of the year, when the clouds hung oppressively low in the heavens, I know. I didn't say. It's because I didn't say the title. And also what I was looking for, I was just like, yep, this is fine. And then it dawned on me. So, you know. When the clouds hung oppressively low in the heavens, I had been passing alone on horseback through a singular deity tract of country, and at length found myself, as the shades of the evening drew on within view of the melancholy house of Usher. I know not how it was, but, with a first glimpse of the building, a sense of insufferable gloom pervaded my spirit. I say insufferable, for the feeling was unrevelled by any of that half pleasurable, because poetic sentient, with which the mild, unusual, or usual receives even the sternest natural images of the desolate or terrible. I looked upon the scene before me, upon the mere house and the simple landscape featured of its domain, upon the bleak walls, upon the vacant eye-like windows, upon a few rank sieges, and upon a few white trunks of decayed trees, with an utter depression of soul which I can compare to no earthly sensation more properly than to the after dream of the reveller upon opium. The bitter lapse into everyday life, the hideous dropping off of the veil. There was an iciness, a sinking, sickening of the heart, an unredeemed dreariness of thought which no goading of the imagination could torture into aught of the sublime. What was it, I paused to think, what was it that so unnerved me in the contemplation of the house of Usher? It was a mystery, all insoluble, nor could I grapple with the shadowy fancies that crowded upon me as I pondered. I was forced to fall back upon the unsatisfactory conclusion that, while beyond a doubt there were any combinations of very simple natural objects which have the power of thus affecting us, still the analysis of the power lies among the considerations beyond our depth. It was possible, I reflected, that a mere difference of arrangement of the peculiar of the scene, of the details of the picture, would be sufficient, or modified, or perhaps to annihilate its capacity for sorrowful impression. And, acting upon this idea, I reined my horse to its perception's brink of the black and lurid tarn that lay unruffled lustre by the dwelling engazed dawn. But, with a shudder even more thrilling than before, upon the remodeled and inverted images of the grey sedge, and the ghastly tree stems, and the vacant and eye-like windows. Nevertheless,
In this mansion of gloom, I now propose myself a sojourn of some weeks. Its proprietor, Roderick Usher, had been one of my boon companions in boyhood, but many years had elapsed since our last meeting. A letter, however, had lately reached me in a distant part of the country, a letter from him, which, in its widely impromptu nature, had admitted no other than a personal reply. The MS gave evidence of a nervous agitation. The writer spoke of an acute bodily illness, a mental disorder which oppressed him, and of an earnest desire to see me, as his best and indeed his only friend, with a view of attempting, by the cheerfulness of my society, some alleviation of his malady. It was a matter in which of all this, and much more, was said. It was the apparent heart that went with his request, which allowed me no room for hesitation, and I accordingly obeyed forthwith that I still considered a very singular summons. Although, as boys, we had been intimate associates, yet I really knew little from my friend. His reserve had been always excessive and habitual. I was aware, however, that his very ancient family had been noted, time out of mind, and a peculiar sensibility of temperament, displaying itself through long ages, in many works of exalted art, and manifested of late in repeated deeds of munificent yet unobstructive charity, as well as in passionate devotion to the intricacies, perhaps even more than to the orthodox and deadly recognizable beauties of musical science. I had learned, too, that very remarkable fact that the stem of the Usher race, all time honored as it was, had put forth at no period any enduring branch. In other words, that the entire family lay in the direct line of descent, and had always, with very trifling and very temporary variation, so lain. It was this deficiency I considered while running over in thought the perfect keeping of the character of the premise with the accredited character of the people, and while speculating upon the possible influence which this one, in the long lapse of centuries, might have exercised upon the other. It was this deficiency, perhaps, of collateral issue, and the consequence undeviating transmission from sire to son of the patrimony with the name, which had at length so identified the two as to merge the original title of the estate to the quaint and equivocal appellation of the House of Usher, an appellation which seemed to include, in the minds of the peasantry who used it, both the family and the family mansions. I have said that the sole effect of my somewhat childish experiment, that of looking down within the tarn, had been to deepen the first singular impression. There can be no doubt that the consciousness of the rapidly increase of my superstition, for why should I not so term them, served mainly to accelerate the increase itself. Such, I have long known, is the paradoxical law of all sentiments having terror as a basis, and it might have been for the reason only that when I again uplifted my eyes to the house itself, from its image in the pool there grew in my mind a strange fancy so ridiculous indeed that I but mentioned it to show the vivid force of the sensations which oppressed me. I had so worked upon my imagination as really to believe that about the whole mansion and domain there hung an atmosphere peculiar to themselves and their immediate vicinity, an atmosphere which had no affinity with the air of heaven, but which had reeked up from the decayed trees, and the grey wall, and the silent tarn, a pestilent and mystic vapour, dull, sluggish, faintly discernible, and leaden-hued. Shaking off from my spirit what must have been a dream, I scanned more narrowly the real aspect of the building. Its principal feature seemed to be that of an excessive antiquity. The discoloration of the ages had been great. Minute fungi overspread the whole exterior, hanging in a fine tangled web-work from the eaves. Yet all of this was apart from the extraordinary dilapidation. No portion of the masonry had fallen, and there appeared to be wild inconsistency between its still perfect adaptation of parts and the crumbling condition of the individual stones. In this there were much that reminded me of the spacious totality of old woodwork which was rotted from long years in some neglected vault, with no disturbance from the breath of the external air. Beyond this indication of extensive decay, however, the fabric gave little token of instability. Perhaps the eye of scrutinizing observer might have discovered a barely perceptible fissure, which, extending from the roof of the building in front, made its way down the wall in a zigzagging direction, until it became lost in the sullen waters of the tarn. Noticing these things, I rode over a short causeway to the house. A servant in waiting took my horse, and I entered the Gothic archway of the hall. A valet of stealthy step thence conducted me, in silence though many dark and intricate passages, in my progress to the studio of his master. Much that I encountered on the way contributed, I know not how, to heighten the vague sentiments of which I had already spoken, while the objects around me, while the carvings of the ceiling, the somber tapestries of the wall, the ebon blackness of the floors, and the phantasmagoric armorial trophies, which rattled as I strode, were but matters of which, or to such as which, I had been accustomed from my infancy. While I hesitated, not acknowledging how familiar all this was, I still wondered to find how unfamiliar the fancies which ordinary images were stirring up. One of these staircases I met the physician of the family. His countenance, I thought, wore a mingled expression of low cunning and perplexity. He accused me of trepidation and passed on. The valet now threw open the door and ushered me into the presence of his master. The room in which I found myself was a very large and lofty. The windows were long, narrow, and pointed, and at so vast a distance from the black oaken floor as to be altogether inaccessible from within. Feeble gleams of crimson light made their way through the trestled panes, and served to render sufficiently distinct and more prominent objects around the eye. However, struggled in vain to reach out to the remorted angles of the chamber, or the recess of the vaulted and fretted ceiling. Dark draperies hung upon the walls. The general furniture was profuse, comfortless, antique, and tattered. Many books and musical instruments lay scattered about, but failed to give the vitality to the scene. Hello, child. You scratching? Okay. Yeah, it's that was just the first 2 pages, by the way. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9. This is a long boy. But you know what? That's fine. It was my fault for not drinking tea before this. I should have known better. That I breathed an atmosphere of sorrow, an air of stern, deep, and irredeemable gloom hung over and pervaded all. Like I said, it takes. Well, funny enough, in the book itself, it does not take up a lot. In reading wise, oh. But I mean, I guess that's the point of these reading streams. Nice and long. I mean, I don't know if my voice is great enough for people to, relax or sleep to, but I don't know. I like it. Upon my entrance, Usher arose from a sofa on which he had been lying at further length, and greeted me with a vivacious warmth which had much in it. I at first thought of an overdone cordiality of the constrained effort of the inhuman man of the world. Yeah, he finally got out of the dilapidated house and dying. He said cringe to dying and decided to become immortal. Hence now he makes music. A glance, however, I'm like, we just got through first 2 pages. I mean, it is gonna be a long one, and do you guys want me to finish reading it, or should we put it aside? Because it is long, and although there is some poems in this. Well, there's like one. I know, a part of me is like, well, I feel bad if I leave the story as is, but at the same time, I'm also like, oh, I think I can continue on. Although I would not be surprised if I have to stop partway through this story just to fill my water. But that would be it. A glance, however, at his countenance convinced me of perfect serenity. That is fair, I suppose. And since we are at the beginning of the page and of the story, nonetheless, I guess it wouldn't be too bad as to move over to Ghost Stories of Canada. Give my hand a break because I should have took a photo of it. That book is huge. I'm like deadlifting it with one hand. Which is good because I don't remember what province we were on last time, and I think it was BC. But I know with this one, I was picking and choosing stories. Yeah. I mean, I do I know I'm kind of making fun. I do like his works. They are great. But you can definitely tell the difference between, you know, our time period and their time period because of all the fucking words. I mean, as we go through this, I guess if we're going on ghost stories, no, I always feel I'm like, yeah, I should probably slip in one of mine because I have. Well, I believe I told this last time when I did this is so growing up, me and my mom have always been sensitive to spirits. So I'll do that. Yeah, you want? I'll tell you one of them. I'll tell you one of them because it is actually kind of scary and it scared me as a teen. But so there's never really, minus I think the place I live at now, and one apartment I lived in. No, not an apartment. One place I lived at before. Those are the only two places where I've never experienced any hauntings as of itself. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, because a lot of them, there are a lot. But, so, of course, I could go through every single place I've lived in that had something spooky or when I've seen ghosts. I don't think I've seen any this week. It was kind of a busy week. No, I saw a bit of mist, but that was it. That's only because I live close to a graveyard, and like I said, I'm sensitive to that shit. But when I was in high school, we lived in a very old house. By very old, I mean it was built in 1917. At the time, that was almost 100 years old. Almost 100. And that house had seen a lot of things. It's seen a tornado come within feet of it. It's lasted through blizzards, drought, you name it. That house has probably seen it. Right. I actually knew somebody in high school who was starting and was becoming a ghost hunter. I think she was with the Fort Qu'Appelle. Fort Qu'Appelle? Yeah, I think it was Fort Qu'Appelle Ghost Hunting Society. I was kind of interested, but
Well, let's just say I wasn't a good time to be deciding outside the norm, but yeah, I personally I would also love that too. Because one, old houses are beautiful, and this house was pretty nice. I'll be honest. Original first floor, 2.5 story, out in the middle of nowhere. But literally, true. I mean, that would be hilarious to see. Like, move over Zach Bagans. I'm gonna fucking beat this ghost. Ooh. Taps. I think I've heard of them. Yeah, and this house was definitely no stranger to weird occurrences. Like there was one room off the living room that it didn't matter the time of year, it didn't matter where the sun was hitting inside of it. Why did it why did it get put? Oh, the Ghost Hunter show. Ooh. Ooh. That would have been cool. You do know the one who released you from Automod was me, right? So, technically, you should be thanking me, Justa. God. Before I was saying these stories a lot better, but, oh, whatever. But yeah, that room was always cold, and you would walk into it, and it didn't matter the time of day, it just felt like somebody in one corner. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I feel Justa had lost his fucking mind. You would always feel like something was staring at you from either all around you. At night, it was all around you. In the daytime, it felt like it was in a corner. And upstairs, my parents had this weirdly shaped, like, it was a rectangle above above their closet that extended the entire length of the closet. Yeah, he's off his rocker off bang right now. And I remember I would sometimes go into my parents' bedroom either to help do laundry, or my parents had a good spot where like the sunlight from both the rising and setting sun like came in through the window, so sometimes I would take a nap after school there. I'm super saying Jesus. And every single time I went into my parents' room, and if I was alone, I wouldn't even have to look at the closet, and I would know there was something in that cubbyhole staying there. Like coffin shape. Like somebody was resting up there as a coffin and they were staring back at me. And I could see it so vividly that it kind of scared me at the same time. I knew it wasn't bad, but there was something else that was. In the basement. The basement was hand dug, and then they used cement blocks to secure the foundation. And the people who used to own it, it was just some clothes. Not when the vivid image is that of a woman that is basically skin and bones with a wiry mess of hair and kind of bulging eyes. I don't think that was a mess of clothes. But that's what I kept seeing. She wasn't bad though. She wasn't that scary. I mean, she was a little creepy, but she wasn't that bad.
But I'll be honest, I never really liked basements. There's something about them. I think it's just because it's under the ground, it's kind of claustrophobic. I don't know. But in that house, I was always scared of it. I mean, I do have a low fear of the dark, but there was something about it that I avoided it. Like, if I could avoid it, I would avoid it. And I remember I was home alone. It was after school. I think my mom was at work. Both my parents were at work, and my brother was at one of his sports things. And on the stairs down to that basement, there was a mirror. Oval mirror with some ornate decoration. I don't know where my family got it. I think it was something my mom got from one of her relatives a long time ago. It's been in the family for a while, so I never questioned it. And I remember just casually looking into it and, kind of fooling around like as you would. And from the direction of the stairs to the basement, loud and clear, like as day, it sounded like there was somebody, a like rough man's voice telling me to get out. And it scared me so bad because that was the first, because I'm used to seeing like shadows, I'm used to seeing mists. I basically ignore them because it's just like, yeah, all right, whatever. If you are something, you are something. If you're not, whatever. But hearing a voice as clear as day when I knew 100% I was alone, and I just put up my hands and said, nope. And I went upstairs to my room. There's possibly that. Yeah. I mean, also, my cat is behind me, so if there's walking you do sometimes hear, it's her. Oh, there was another scary one. I'm trying to remember. Well, I mean, not trying to remember. I'm like, there's so many. Which one? I think that was definitely my most scariest one, though. No, that's called schizophrenia. Okay. That's a little harsh right there for sure. Okay, I know for sure I don't have schizophrenia, by the way, guys, because there are ways you can tell if you have schizophrenia. They are not your real friends. Why are you guys comforting? This is... Wow. I tell a ghost story that I've experienced and you all are just like, yeah, it's probably schizophrenia. Like, what? No. Stop it. Ooh, weed. I think you'll like this one. There's more to heaven and earth that exists in your philosophies, Horatio. No, okay. So I was renting an apartment with some friends a few years back, and that place gave me one of the weirdest. See, I don't know if you've seen like some of the stuff where people will be like, yeah, there's they would see like disembodied legs or arms or heads or whatnot.
Yeah, I saw that one night. Like I was tired, and I was like, oh no, was I tired? No, I was pretty wide awake. No, I had an argument with a friend, and I remember looking at my roommate's door, and there was a pair of disembodied female legs by her door, and I was like, oh, okay, okay. Yeah, those legs better start. Those legs better be working. But yeah. So no, I don't have schizophrenia because I actually know someone who does have schizophrenia, and that's not what they have. And that was not what I had. Alright. No, I was yelling at Arthur for that. Alright. Now let's actually try to get into the stories. Whatever. I mean, you can't be a witch without having some form of whatever. My luck happens to be... Did you play footsies? I did not step near those things. No thank you. Although it was very hilarious that I was by my roommate, because when I told her, like, I think a year later or so, like, we were just casually bringing it, like, into conversation. I'm like, yeah, I remember seeing a pair of disembodied legs by your bedroom door, and she was just like, what? 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 uh... The Eliza Anderson. When she was new, the Eliza Anderson was a fine ship as you could find in the West Coast. No, they weren't. They were bare feet. Good for you. You could suck on those toes if you want to. But by 1897, the side wheeler had served the Olympia, Washington to Victoria, British Columbia mail run for nearly 40 years and was effectively worn out. Yeah, but I wouldn't put it past you. Let's just go with that. Her owner, the Northwestern Steamship Company, floated the aging craft to the holding dock until it could arrange to tow her to the scrapyard. The company must not have needed the money it would recover from salvaging the Eliza Anderson. The abandoned ship was left to rot in a muddy, weed-infested slough. You know what? I'm playing Phasmophobia on Wednesday. We can test that out then. We can see if their toes are cold. And then that can answer your question. I'll probably die trying to get you that answer, but we can see. Unless you have the game, and then, you can test that yourself. Over the next 2 years, the vessel sat there deteriorating due to natural causes, a process that was hurried along by the vandals and scavengers who stripped away many parts of the form of the once proud craft. Oh god. The last time I played it, I was just asking... No. I kept going around going, hello? Mr. Mike, where are you? And also, my group was being very, very, very horny to the goats. So yeah, if you guys do have it, I mean, that's it. In August of 1899, the Eliza Anderson was brought out of retirement for one long last voyage, a voyage to a paranormal encounter. Her crew for this trip from Victoria to Alaska via the Inside Passage was a mismatched bunch of sailors chosen in great haste, led by a captain named Tom Powers. Potential profit was the only motive for this reclamation, and so only minimal repair work was done to make the neglected and abused ship seaworthy once more.
That's fair. And also, I'm not gonna question that. I always see that and I'm like, and again, seafood is expensive, so. In order to make the venture more financially rewarding, the ship's owners not only took freight but passengers too. Most of them were prospectors, fortune hunters, much more interested in finding gold, the gold mother lode, rather than getting along with her fellow passengers. The Eliza Anderson was not long out of port when serious squabbles began on board. The crew members were fighting amongst themselves, as were the passengers. Long before, animosity developed between the two groups as well. This trip was not destined to be pleasant. I don't think I'd be able to play it in VR just because motion blur. I'd probably get sick. Not long after the vessel of the Discontent passed the port of Prince Rupert, British Columbia, en route to Alaska, she ran into a heavy storm. Tempers on board flared even more. It was not until the chief engineer came topside and reported that coal supplies were dangerously low. That all those on board the Eliza Anderson realized this was no time for petty quarrels. If they did not work together to get this ship of fools safely through the storm, none of them would live to tell the tale. Captain Powers immediately ordered passengers and crew alike to begin breaking apart anything on board that was flammable and not structurally necessary. I don't know if they were getting handsier if you were. I could see the that last statement. Not structurally necessary. And if they did not have coal, then they'd use whatever they could to generate enough steam to get them through the gale. Once a supply of flammable material was stockpiled, the majority of the badly frightened men resorted to the only other helpful activity they could think of: prayer. It would take divine intervention, they were sure, to keep this badly neglected 40-year-old piece of scrap metal from sinking. She, and being buffed badly enough by the high waves, too frightened everyone so bad on board that when they were forced, the storm toppled the smoke. What are the sentences I am creating? It would take divine intervention, they were sure, to keep this badly neglected 40-year-old piece of scrap metal from sinking. She was being buffed badly enough by the high waves to frighten everyone on board. When the force of the storm toppled the smokestack and sent it crashing onto the deck, all the board knew that the storm was stronger than their ship. Those who had been at sea before knew that such an imbalance was a recipe for disaster. Devs, buff the boat, please. Captain Powers recruited every person in his care to work towards getting the ship through the storm. He ordered some to clean the steam pumps, some to dump the oil from their cargo hold into the waves with the hope of claiming them, and others to work with the rudder. Those not otherwise occupied broke up more wood to stoke the fire. Despite everyone's efforts, the best the Eliza Anderson could manage was to survive the storm raging around her. The crew had no hope of generating enough power to move away from the foul weather. All they could do was pray they would still be floating by the time the storm had either dissipated or moved on. After 2 days and 2 nights of constantly battling the elements, all on board were exhausted. The storm raged around them. No relief appeared to be in sight.
The end in form of certain death to all seemed imminent. By the third morning, Captain Powers had lost his bearings. He had no idea which direction he was in. The situation was utterly hopeless. There was no way of knowing whether they were going to be buffed against the rocks, or how much more beating of the ship structure could take from the wind and waves before it started to crack. Powers knew that if either of the possibilities occurred, it would only be a matter of time before the crews and passengers alike were all tossed to a watery grave. Just as their fate seemed inevitable, a sailor on the bridge thought he spotted something through the curtain of the torrential rain. He hesitated before announcing his sight, for he couldn't believe what he was seeing. There appeared to be a small boat approaching them on the waves. As it came closer and closer, the sailor was able to make out an outline, the outline of a lone occupant in a woeful, inadequate craft, rolling all his might to the Eliza Anderson. He tied his rowboat to the large ship's ropes, and a second later, a veritable giant of a man, raw-boned and muscular, was on board the distressed ship. Captain Powers, his crew, and the passengers watched in disbelief as the larger-than-life figure took the wheel of their ravaged vessel, almost unprecedentedly at first, and then more obviously. The seemingly doomed ship began to move in a specific direction. No longer was she just being tossed about in the whim of angry whim. Within hours they had navigated to the edge of the storm. The seas calmed, and the danger lessened. Several hours later, land was in sight. The terrified souls on board the Eliza Anderson were no longer in peril. As silently as he had boarded the ship, the mysterious stranger left. He made his way down the rope ladder to his little craft, untied it, and rowed away. The thoughts of those left behind on the Eliza Anderson immediately turned to the presence that had steered them to safety, to the task of finding help in this isolated location. And, once they did, it was some time before anyone was ready to discuss the unexpected rescue. By then, many of the people who had been on the ship had decided that the phantom who piloted them to safety had only been a figment of their collective imaginations. Oh, it's still going. Okay. In 1899, an anonymous writer who had been on the board of the Eliza Anderson and witnessed the supernatural rescue submitted an article to the newspaper in Seattle, Washington. He mentioned that he had recognized the savior as the ghost of Captain Tom Wright, who had owned and operated the Eliza Anderson until his death. He wrote, "Captain Tom's spirit saw our danger. He knew and loved the Anderson, and that was how it happened that stranger came out onto the storm and brought us safely to land." We can never know for sure what happened that stormy, fateful day off the coast of British Columbia, but it would certainly seem as though supernatural intervention played an important light-saving role. We do know that all on board the ship escaped with their lives that day, and the Eliza Anderson never failed again. Yeah, no, he just went, yep. He just came, I don't even think he was a goat. I think this ties in with one of the Yukon ones. Because there was this story where the ghost wasn't a ghost, it was a dude who actually lived on the island. He was on board the ship and was like, "We're gonna die if I don't do something." So him and his brothers got a boat, rowed it back, steered the ship to their house, or to their island, left them a bunch of coal and was like, "Alright, see you. Never again." I think we can do one more and then my voice should be... Yeah. Well, and also I think he was sneaking he was sneaking across the border because he was the only one that could work. So he would go to the States and then sneak back and so on and so forth. And it was just like, yeah, I don't want to die, so I know where this is. I'll save you guys. Time slips. I think this will be the last one, and then that'll be good for the night. Not all ghost stories involve the spirits of people. Places can also be haunted by the past, and witnesses claim that one of Victoria, British Columbia's major roads is such a place. It is said that in the wee hours of the night during the month of October, modern Shelburne streets harkens back to its past. Folks who would have seen this spooky transformation are usually driving south and are usually alone in their car. As their familiar surroundings change, they would wonder if they've taken the wrong turn. But how could that be? They haven't turned at all. Worse, this is the route they know well. They know that there should be a paved road lined with buildings and well-lit streets. Instead, they are looking at a rural scene, a country road with an uncapped ditches at the sides and not a single building in sight. Taken aback by this strange sight, the lone driver inevitably wants to get his or her car turned around as quickly as possible. But the road is so narrow that it is impossible to make a U-turn without ending up in the ditch. Just then, the scene shifts again and reverts to the modern, well-lit paved road of contemporary buildings. The relief must be palpable, but there's still a nagging question. What just happened? Did the person see the ghost of what Shelburne Street once was, or momentarily traveled back in time? If that is the case, then bizarre circumstances are an excellent example of a phenomenon known as retrocognition. Another example was reported on a residential street in Metchosin, not far from Victoria, where people have watched in awe as a large red wagon filled with oak barrels is pulled along by two handsome draft horses. Some who have witnessed the supernatural event say that after the anomaly passes, it morphs into a red delivery truck. Yet another incident of retrocognition took place in the province during the early 1930s, at a party in a recently renovated house in Vancouver's West End. What makes this case even more intriguing is that the room full of people shared this encounter. The story really starts at in the early days of the last century, when a couple purchased a small parcel of land in what is now the West End of Vancouver. They built a home there and settled in. Neighbors later reported that newcomers were rather an odd pair. The woman was extremely outgoing, but the man was a virtual recluse. No one in the area had a chance to learn much more than that because the woman died just 6 months later. The bereaved husband hastily sold the place and moved away. No more is known about the house between that time and in 1931, when a young couple purchased the place. Initially, the two were delighted with their real estate investment and did not plan to make any changes to the interior layout. The master bedroom on the main floor, which they felt was convenient. But they felt uneasy right from the first night in that room. I'm sorry, I don't. I do kind of understand what you're saying based on context, but unfortunately I'm only English speaking. But you are welcome to stay. But they felt uneasy right from the first night in that room. When that uncomfortable feeling didn't fade, the pair decided that some renovations would be necessary after all. They decided to sleep in another bedroom to enlarge the living room to include most of what had been the original master bedroom.
It was not long before the changes were completed. The couple was so pleased with the way their home looked that they decided to invite friends over for a housewarming party. The celebration started off wonderfully well. The guests seemed to be enjoying themselves in ways with a newly enlarged living room. I think reading all that Edgar Allan Poe has kind of messed my brain up a bit. That's fine. Then, according to the woman who had been a guest at the evening, at precisely 11 o'clock, the room became unaccountably cold. What happened next was far more concerning. A whirlwind of nothingness suddenly manifested in part of the room that had been the master bedroom. Then, out of the whirlwind, slowly emerged a massive four-poster bed on which a woman was lying, clearly at the point of departure from this life. Her eyes were fixed in fear and horror. Beside her was the indistinct figure of a man sitting in a Victorian chair at her bedside, the anonymous witness attested. No, I think it was just all the stories in general, really. One of the other guests, a neighbor who had lived in the area for a long time, shouted that he recognized the apparition. He identified them as the couple that had built the place. The images didn't stay long, but they did succeed in bringing everyone in the party to abrupt and early end. Agreeing not to tell anyone of the supernatural event that they had witnessed, the guests quickly dispersed. Despite all the effort the new owners had put into the house, they realized they could never be comfortable staying there and immediately listed their home for sale. The couple was relieved the place sold quickly, and, as they wanted to be clear of anything associated with the place, they arranged to sell their newly purchased furniture, draperies, and even rugs. The woman who provided the account of the party, including the manifestation of the bed and the apparitions, went to the auction of her friend's belongings. Perhaps she was interested in purchasing some of the items for herself, for she inspected the articles carefully. The living room rug was especially attractive to her. Her interest quickly turned to horror, however, when she discovered that on one end of the carpet there was a rectangular arrangement of 4 well-worn indentations, it looked, exactly as though some heavy piece of furniture, perhaps a large 4-poster rosewood bed, had rested there for a matter of months. Most of the people who attended the housewarming party had presumably gone to their own final reward, without ever having publicly identified themselves as participants in the bizarre incident of retrocognition. And what of the haunted house itself? The building was demolished, and a large apartment building still now stands in its place. It would be interesting to know if any of the tenants have ever seen anything unexplainably in any of the suites. And that is all I can do for the night. My throat is... ow. But that was good. I hope you guys all enjoyed. I hope you guys all enjoyed. I will be back Monday, playing Your Turn to Die, a game of Majority. That's been one I've been interested in for a while because I've seen some of it and it looks great. We can simp on some of the characters. It'll be good. And yeah, I'll post the schedule on Discord and Twitter tomorrow. Until then, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will see you Monday. Bye!